Hi, I'm Kristen, and this is the Simple Handmade Everyday Podcast, where I talk about living a creative, intentional life. I like to chat about quilting, sometimes knitting, cross-stitch, what I'm reading and watching, and a little bit about self-care, productivity, and keeping a cozy, organized home. I've got my cup of tea in hand, so grab yours, and let's settle in for a chat. This is episode 94. Hello, friends. How are you? Look at me. I'm back 2 weeks after my last podcast. So I'm hoping to stay on my every 2-week schedule that I had so firmly entrenched at one point and lost along the way. So I'm glad to be back here on a wonderfully overcast Sunday morning. Getting a little bit of overcast weather is as close to fall as we're going to get. So it's been beautiful. I think we had a high of 70 yesterday. I'm wearing like joggers, like sweatpants today, which are nice and cozy. I'm loving this. However, when I was doing our menu plan for the week, it looks like it's going to be back into the mid-80s next week. So we're not quite to soup weather, but my husband and I were talking yesterday about how we really want to dig into soups this fall and winter. And we always do soup, and I kind of do a once a week soup. That's kind of been an established pattern, but maybe we'll do twice a week. But most importantly, I want to find some new soup recipes instead of like my half dozen tried and true. I want to try some new ones. So if you have any, let me know. So I hope that you have a nice cozy drink with you. Today I am drinking this wonderful cup of tea. It is by Fortnum and Mason, which is a department store in England, and it is elderflower, strawberry, and rose, and they come in what says silky infusion bags. It's wonderful. My wonderful friend Pam brought this back with her when she's British, and she was back there, and she brought me this wonderful tea, and I am loving it. So thank you very much, Pam. I hope that you guys have something fun to drink, whether it's a warm or a cold thing. Well, where are we? Kind of smack mid-October here, and I am sort of beginning to sink back into my routine, my very established routine of just how my days go. And that has taken me a long time to get to, just because of a lot of the traveling that I've been doing the last, basically in September, and then I'm just trying to figure out which way is up here in October. We did have 2 guests this week, just one of my friend/clients for dinner, and then my dad was just here for a few days. He just left this morning, and so of course that always throws off the routine, but in a good way. We made some good meals and some good desserts and drank a lot of good wine, so I'm not complaining, but I am ready as we head into the rest of this month to kind of get back to my abstentious ways and find my healthy eating, less carbs, more vegetables, less wine, kind of find my footing back there again. And I think I'm ready. As a matter of fact, we talk about routine, my friend Frances and I, over on the Empty Nest Chronicles blog. I think I talked about that last podcast, that Frances Dow over at the Off Kilter Quilt, she and I have launched a blog about just the things that we like to talk about with each other. About, it's more than just being an empty nest, because, she actually doesn't quite have an empty nest yet, and the almost empty nest. But it's really about things, just midlife, things that concern women of this age, as our children are leaving and we are reclaiming rooms of the house and trying to figure out new routines for hair and makeup and wardrobes and things like that. So I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to pop over there. We're blogging. A new blog releases every Friday, so we've got a few under our belt there if you want to go check that out. So here we are, mid-Halloween, and have you done any Halloween decorating? I am really learning. I spent some time on YouTube, and man, people love to decorate for Halloween. Halloween is not my favorite holiday, and it's not that I have any, real issues with it, like it's evil or anything. It just doesn't appeal to me, and it may have been when I was in high school. I worked at a costume shop for 2 Halloween seasons, and by the time we got to Halloween, I wanted nothing to do with it. So now that the kids are not here, I had this little tub, just, pretty modest, of Halloween decorations. We do the spider webs by the front door, and we had a spider and a pumpkin and some lights and, things like that. And a little thing we'd hang on the door that says trick or treat. And I have pulled none of that out, nor do I think I'm going to. And I was going to buy a big pumpkin at Trader Joe's the other day, kind of those like big weird looking ones. But I don't know. I couldn't make myself do it for some reason. I don't know. I'm just not into it. I do have some. I bought some of the smaller ones, and they're in like a centerpiece on the kitchen table. So that is the one thing I have for Halloween or fall. I did switch out my pillow covers for plaid. On my throw pillow covers, which is my other nod. And I'm kind of draping more quilts over the couch arm and, stacking them on the bench and things like that. Because in the spring and summer, I realized I really want things to be kind of minimal and light and airy and open. And then, of course, in fall and then winter, I feel like I want a few more things and for it to be a little cozier. So but that's really it. So I'm kind of curious if you guys do much Halloween decorating or fall decorating. I know, I'm also not one to really pull out a bunch of, fall stuff either. So I don't know. I'd like to change things up. We talked about that last episode about different ways of preparing your home for the coming season that doesn't involve pulling out bins. And if that's your thing, if your joy is to really deck out your house for fall, more power to you. I'm glad that there's room for all of us here, and I get inspired by looking at that. But I need to do it on a lower level. The only other thing really going on around here is, I never remember what I talk about from episode to episode, but, one of my goals for this year was to renovate our bathroom, and we have done that, but I have the last 10% is not done, which is just the final, some decor items, including putting up some shelves and things like that. And I think my husband and I are going to tackle that today, which is good because I'm going to be recording an episode over on the Make and Decorate with Stephanie podcast, which I highly recommend. She is a quilter. She's been making clothes lately. I've been seeing on Instagram. So she's an accomplished sewist. And also an amazing interior decorating who just knows what to do. And I leaned on her heavily for her opinion and sending me the right direction on so many things during this renovation. So we will talk about that, plus some other, sewing and quilting related things over on her podcast. I don't know when that will air, but it is giving me the kick in the pants I need to finish up the bathroom. So part of the reason that I'm not finishing is because I'm nervous that what I have picked out is not going to work. And that is the bottom line, is that this interior decorating stuff, it does not come naturally to me. And I'm just a little bit nervous about things. So hopefully I can just get over it, and we'll be finishing that up today. Before I head into the quilting segment, I have a question for you guys. I was going to ask this at the end, but I suspect not everybody gets all the way to the end, so I'm going to ask it here. So I have, ever since I discovered cross stitch, I have been looking at various floss tube channels, and I particularly like the ones where people cross stitch and quilt, obviously, for obvious reasons. And it is such an appealing visual format where they are just holding things up and going, this is the quilt block I made, this is the cross stitch I'm working on, and here's the book or whatever. And it has got me thinking about whether or not it would be worth the effort, honestly, for me to do a YouTube version of this podcast. So what I am envisioning is kind of the way that Sherry over at Quilting Life, Sherry and Chelsea, they do a video recording, and then that is released as an audio podcast as well. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. I'm worried about how that all works with the editing. But anyways, I'm just curious if that would be something that you guys would like. If you would like to see the things. Now, I do show notes, and I'm not perfect about it, but I do like, if I'm talking about a quilt that I'm working on, I like to include a picture. So, that there is a way to always go over and look at those things, or click the link, to go over to look at a quilt pattern on Fat Quarter Shop or wherever that I'm talking about. So I might put a little poll in the Simple Handmade Everyday Facebook group to kind of see if that is something, some people just, listen to these things when they are on a walk or driving. So I guess you would still have that. So some people have no interest in the video aspect, and some people have really no interest in just the audio aspect. So pop over in the show notes and let me know what you think about that. Or you can contact me. You can email me. You could DM me on Instagram, whatever. Yeah, there's lots of ways to get a hold of me. But I'm just kind of feeling that idea out. Now, from my perspective, it's harder because I need a spot to do it that's a nice background. I need lighting, which I actually have, but I would just have to get it set up, and then I have to do my hair and makeup. So anyways, let me know what you think. Before we head into quilting, I'd like to thank the Fat Quarter Shop for their generosity in sponsoring the podcast. The Fat Quarter Shop is a one-stop show for quilting fabrics and supplies for quilters around the world. They stock quilt shop quality fabrics, pre-cuts, quilt kits, patterns, notions, and even cross-stitch supplies. And we know that they do an amazing number of quilt-alongs and stitch-alongs. So they are just such a great place for inspiration to keep you on track and, being reinvigorated in your crafty life here. So there is an upcoming quilt-along rather, for Scrappiness is Happiness, which is a new book by Lori Holt. And the quilt pulls blocks from throughout this amazing book to create a wonderful sampler quilt. So it's got, the book has 32 scrappy quilts, and they, everything from these adorable, sort of novelty things like apples and pumpkins and bees and things like that to, more normal traditional quilt blocks. So it's going to be an adorable sampler. I highly recommend the book. The quilt along starts on Halloween on October 31st. You've got plenty of time to go grab the book and start pulling from your stash. It's a scrappy. She's all about the scraps. So and even Kimberly over in the Fat Quarter Shop is kind of all about use what you have, use the investment that you've made. So I encourage you to do that. As always, there will be a link in the show notes. All right, let's talk some quilting. I'm always a little nervous about this segment right now because I just have not been doing as much quilting as I once did. But here's what I've realized is I am loving handwork. Now, I love hand piecing. I've got, if you're new here, I have multiple videos on my YouTube channel about how to hand piece. Patty Dudick from Elm Street Quilts and I have done 3 hand piece quilt along, so it's well established that I love to do some hand piecing. And I kept thinking, I watched a trunk show from on the Fat Quarter Shop by Camille Ross Kelly. So she is Camille of Bonnie and Camille. You might know her as Thimble Blossoms. When I first came to quilting, it was really because of her that I really fell in love with a lot of the new fabrics and patterns. I bought her books. I loved everything about Bonnie and Camille. And I think over time, I kind of got over it because I kind of felt like the fabric lines, they seemed like very similar. Now, in some ways, that was wonderful because they all played together very nicely. But at some point, I was kind of had enough. Well, she's just on her own now. Her mother retired. And I think, she's kind of branching out and doing some new things. But I pulled out this unfinished quilt I have, this whip. And I'm seeing that the copyright on it is 2017. And it is the Make-A-Wish quilt along, charity quilt along that they did in 2017. So I probably started in February. So it's almost 6 years ago. And the thing about this quilt is the blocks were 5 inches. And I know I had just discovered hand piecing and I was looking for a project to do. And this seemed so perfect because, smaller blocks are sometimes harder to do by machine. So these are 5-inch blocks and they're pretty, heavily pieced. And there are, I think it's 72 blocks in this quilt. I think there were, let's just say there were, I'm going to make this up, 12 blocks. And then you'd have to make, this is not the right number, obviously, but like you'd make 4 or maybe you'd make 6 of those blocks, So it was just like a scrappy sampler. I'm using all Bonnie and Camille fabrics. And I finished those blocks. I finished those blocks, I don't know, within a year, which, is no small feat. What I haven't done is sew the sashing. I've even cut all the sashing. Not all the sashing, the short sashing that goes between the blocks, not ones that would go between the rows. And I'm worried about that because I'm not 100% sure what white I used. Back then, I heavily used Kona snow. And so I'm hoping that's it. I'm going to have to go to a local quilt shop and figure this out. But that really bums me out that I didn't set aside that background fabric. Although I might have, because I have the backing. I bought the backing fabric and it's not in here. So maybe I put background with that. That would be nice. Anyways, so what I'm thinking about doing is, and what stopped me here is that it's 72 blocks. So I'm going to need to lay the whole thing out and take a picture of it. And does it say, I'm sorry for the crinkles. So the finished size is 58 by 64, which is 58 is bigger than the width of my design board, which is only 48 inches. So it's just going to be hard to lay it out and not get things mixed up. But I think I'm going to take this step and I'm going to lay it out, take a picture of it, and then, I don't know, just, put it together in rows, and clip those rows together. Because, sewing sashing on from a hand piecing perspective is so easy. You don't even have to mark the seam, because I'm always going to sew, when I hand piece, I always sew on the more complicated side of the block, the one with more seams, so that I can finagle going through them. And so I don't even have to mark the sashing on the other side, because it's just a straight piece of fabric. So so I'm thinking about that. And another kind of tip that I've picked up, and this is just true when you kind of experiment with other hobbies, you just learn things and you kind of figure out different ways of incorporating into your life. But so I watched a lot of floss tubes, and in addition to realizing how wonderful that visual format is, a lot of these floss tubers, they have a gazillion projects going at a time, like, oh, look, I'm going to show you all my whips. Oh gosh, there was only 12. Like, I thought there were more, which I can't do that. I am not a perfectly monogamous quilter or stitcher, but I can't have 12 projects going. But I do like that a lot of how people kind of deal with having so many works in progress and staying invigorated for each one is to kind of set aside days of the week to do certain things. So I was thinking, maybe I should, I can cross stitch on Mondays, hand piece on Tuesdays. I have some knitting that I want to get back to, we'll talk about, and maybe knit on Wednesdays or whatever, and just kind of rotate through, so that, because what I'm afraid of is I get obsessed with one thing and I really start working on that, and the projects, fall to the wayside, and you don't get back to them for years, and then you're like, I don't like this anymore, and I don't want to do that. I want to work on the things while I still love them, and I think I will continue to love them when they're done. It's just those things that you don't want to, you fall out of love with a few years later if you've never finished. So I'm going to play around with that idea. So I'm curious of those of you who are multi-craftal, is that a word? Do you do that? Do you rotate through? Because right now, I think it's well established. I got a little obsessed with cross stitching, and I stopped sewing. So, and I don't want to do that, because I do love quilting, and I want to kind of figure out a way to work that back in, even if it is more. And maybe I set aside a day for hand quilting, or hand piecing, and a day for machine quilting, and so every week I'm moving forward on multiple projects. I think that might be something I'm willing to try. I'm not sure if that's going to fit my personality or not. So that's kind of where I am for my quilting things. One thing I wanted to mention to you, as we are heading into Christmas, which we'll also talk about a little bit more at the end of the podcast, if you want to get inspired, well, even for fall, but especially thinking forward for Christmas, I'm going to include a link in the show notes for an email series by Sherry McConnell from A Quilting Life. Now, I've talked about Sherry before. Oh my goodness, she blogs with great regularity, every day, I think. I mean, it's amazing. And she has such great content. She's a fabric designer for Moda, Sherry and Chelsea. That's with her daughter, which I think is so amazing. They have a podcast. She writes books. She makes patterns. And she also, we have a lot of common interests just in things like, we have very similar taste for home decor, and we from an organizational productivity standpoint, we have some overlap. She kind of got into the Sunday basket in the Silk and Sandra journal. So we have just so many crossovers. So she's amazing. So I saw that she had this, it's a blog series, and forgive me, Sherry, for not remembering what it is. It's like 10 to 14 days of where you sign up for it, and then you get an email, and she talks about all kinds of things that are going to help you get inspired and prepared for the holidays. She does a home tour of Christmas decorations. One day you get an email all about tree skirts. I'm sorry if this is too much of a spoiler, but Christmas stockings and ornaments, like all kinds of things. And she's got so much content on her blog that she can give you lots of examples of patterns and things to kind of get you inspired for whatever is striking you this year. You're obviously not going to do it all, but maybe this is the year that you want to make stockings for your kids, or you desperately need a new tree skirt or whatever. So anyways, I'll put a link in the show notes, and you should definitely check that out. I've enjoyed getting those each day. And then, you should just be checking out her blog as she's pulling out her fall quilts and her fall makes and things like that. You will absolutely be inspired. Oh, I do have more things to talk about quilting related. Fat Quarter Shop is very generous and sends me some samples of the things that are coming into their shop. And it's a very fun part of what I do here. And I want to talk to you about a new book from It's So Emma, which is the Fat Quarter Shop publishing arm, and it's called Simply Half Yard Quilts. And I thought this was a great idea because, there are lots of patterns out there for charm packs and jelly rolls, but not a lot for, getting some half yards, which is a cut that you can really do some bigger blocks with, which I think is kind of fun. So it's a beautiful book. It's spiral bound, but the pages are nice and thick, so you don't have to worry about it ripping out. I love a spiral bound quilt book because it stays open when you're trying to use it. The quilts in this book, and of course the photography is gorgeous. And if you've never done an It's So Emma pattern, they write brilliant patterns, and they're so clear, so easy to use. So they're just really well done with lots of graphics. So this book is broken down into four types of quilts. You have one block quilts, just add sashing quilts, multiple block quilts, and one big block quilts. So I went through this book and I have picked out my favorites from each of these categories. And so for the one block quilt, which is, exactly what it sounds like, it's one block just over and over. And all of these quilts in this book are perfect for when a new fabric line comes out and you have fallen in love, and maybe you can't, afford a fat quarter bundle, or you don't like every fabric in the line, but you do love the line. You can go in and you can pick out your favorite six prints or something, and make a quilt like that, which I really like that style of quilt where, each block is just made from like a background and one fabric. It's a great way to show off a line that you really love. Sherry McConnell just excels at those types of quilts, and her daughter Chelsea too. So for the one block quilt, and the one block quilts are just one block, no sashing between them, just they run right together. There's this one called the Mirage quilt, and what's very cool about that, and they're big blocks, so I see the sample they've done here are some bigger florals, in which, don't work for every type of quilt, right? Because we're cutting those fabrics too small, but this gives you a chance to use some of those bigger prints, and it's just one simple block made of half square triangles. The mighty half square triangles. It is just the most utilitarian block ever, just depending on which way you turn them, they make a multitude of shapes. So this is one block made of different half square triangles, and then it's just oriented different ways in the quilt, and it all goes together to make this brilliant secondary X pattern. I love it. So that's the one block. It's the Mirage quilt. One block plus sashing is exactly what it sounds like. It's still the one block quilt, but you put some sashing around the blocks, give them a little space to breathe, and it creates a completely different look. So this one that I like is called the Legacy quilt. It's just a very large kind of involved star block. I'm looking at how it's put together. It's like there's, just big patches, there's flying geese, and some half square triangles. That's it. but brilliantly put together. And the blocks, what's cool about this one is the blocks are big. The finished size of the block is 24 inches. So it makes a big quilt. I think, what does it say here? It's 84.5 by 84.5. The one thing, I wonder if could I do it? Not all, but a lot of these quilts are square. I have mixed feelings about square quilts because we are tall people in our family. So if you get a quilt that's going to cover our toes, then it's very wide. That's my swoon quilt that I made years ago. It's the same kind of thing. It's these 9 very large blocks, and it just sits on our bed. We have a queen size bed, and it doesn't tuck anywhere; it just can stay right on top as a blanket layer. But it's kind of unwieldy to use on the couch. But anyways, this legacy quilt, and I could probably just do 6 blocks, and it would be just tall and skinny. So that is blocks. 1 block plus sashing. The next category is multiple block quilts, which is exactly what you think it is. But most of them, I think they just have 2 blocks. And my favorite one is called the Reflection Quilt. And I'll take some pictures of these, and if I remember, and put them in the show notes. This particular one, the sample is red and white, which I've always wanted to make a red and white quilt. Well, I guess I have. My first quilt was French General. It's basically red and white. Anyways, it's a star quilt. And then it employs what I would say is the Bonnie Hunter method, where she often has a star block and then a secondary block that chains, so that when you look at the full quilt, this secondary pattern emerges in those the blocks that are not the stars. They kind of chain together, and I love that look. That's one of my favorite styles of a quilt. The last one is the big block quilt. And, I forgot to mark. There's so many, it doesn't matter which ones I like here because I like them all. And that is, the quilt is 1 big block. So you're really using some big pieces here. And they are mostly like stars that I want to say sort of are exploding out. And I would really like to make one of these. The Constellation quilt is one that I liked, and also the Starburst. They're both great. Now, the thing with those is they also are like 60 by 60, which is what I want to say is I think these would make a great modern baby quilt. Because moms these days, they're not so into the cutesy, right? So, and it would be so fun and quick to put these together. 60 by 60 is a little big for a baby quilt, but most of these quilts have borders on them. And so if they don't have borders, the more like in the 48 to 50 inch range, and I'm not really a border person anyways, so that I think is actually a really nice size for a baby quilt. Oh yeah, I'm looking at this Constellation quilt thinking I need to make that. Nobody I know, I'm on that no man's land of people are not having babies right now. My kids and their friends are not quite to baby making stage yet. And, so anyways, and that's the one big star quilts there at the last part of that book. They're all, I think they look very modern, even though the star is kind of a traditional block. I feel like the treatment of it being so huge is makes it very modern. So I'm totally loving that. Okay. The other thing that they have sent me, Fat Quarter Shop, are 4 quilt patterns. And, it's funny. I was looking at them going, okay, I should give these away. There's just only so many quilts I can make, right? And then every time I looked at them, I'm like, oh, no, I really like that. But so what I'm going to do is I've got 4 quilts patterns. I'm going to put them in pairs and do 2 giveaways. And so to enter the giveaway, I'll put it in my show notes. Just leave a comment whether you want, let's see, how do I want to distinguish them? I'll just, call them group 1 and 2 in the show notes, so you'll know what to do. So the first, I want to talk about them, and I'll put pictures in there. The first one's called Desert Daybreak, and this is really the one that when I saw, they on the front of these patterns, they kind of have a close-up, and then you can see the full quilt. And the close-up, I'm like, oh, that's very cute. But when you see the whole quilt and you see these secondary patterns happening, I'm like, oh, that's kind of brilliant. That's Desert Daybreak. See, this is one of those times that I wish I could just show you. But let me tell you how they describe Desert Daybreak. Create a new landscape with the Desert Daybreak quilt. Fanciful stars perch on this fun quilt setting to create even more brilliant secondary stars. And that is absolutely true. So the second one in this group is called Painted Meadow. And by the way, all of these patterns are by Crystal Stahl, and she just does a beautiful job. So for Painted Meadow, it says, strong stars glow with a colorful stained glass effect, belying a fat eighth friendly design. And that is all very true. Yeah, the stained glass effect. I see that. And if you have fat eighths, that's another way to get an inexpensive way to experiment with a line that you've fallen in love with. So that's group one. Group two is the Ivy and Fern quilt pattern. And this is very pretty because it's all done in grays and greens, dark greens and medium greens and some lighter greens. It's very pretty. I guess that's the fern aspect. The Ivy and Fern quilt pattern is a peaceful quilt design that ebbs and flows with a sweet balance. Deceptively delicate blocks are a beautiful way to frame your favorite colors and prints. And also, all of these patterns have multiple sizes: throw, lap, queen. Some of them have, this one has a crib size even for a baby quilt. And the last one is called Marseille. And I don't have the description for Marseille. It is it's also a beautiful star design. It's a one block quilt with sashing, and it's very cute the way they've done it. It almost looks like there's little bow ties all over it in a very cute way. So that'll be group two, Marseille and Ivy and Fern. Let's move on to talking about some cross stitch. I am surrounded by my props here so that I can talk about them. So I participated in the Fat Quarter Shop Mystery Christmas Time Quilt Along, but I've talked about that before, and Stitch Along. And this was a very fun, cute stitch. It's on some kind of burlappy looking Aida cloth, and a couple different colors of green, couple different colors of red. It's very cute. It says Merry Little Christmas. Some people didn't like the word little and took that out and added a different, just took the candy design and put it right there, which I thought was kind of smart because I wasn't sure what that word was for the longest time. But anyways, as a sort of new cross stitcher, I did not know how to finish this. So I've mentioned this before. I am not going to frame cross stitch and have it hanging around my house. It's just like, I don't think it's my husband's. That's not his aesthetic. It's not really mine. Although it's making me want a sewing room, because if I just really had a sewing room, then yes, I would definitely hang these especially these kind of quilty themed cross stitches. I would hang those suckers up all over a crafting studio, but not really through the house. So I was like, what am I going to do with this? I thought about the shape of it is kind of circular, and I thought I would just finish it in a hoop. I don't use a hoop when I embroider, but that's one way that people finish those, and those are cute it's lightweight, it's inexpensive, it's easy to pack away. So I actually even bought a hoop. It was $1.99 at Michael's, and I didn't cut anything. I just put it in there and looked at it and thought, wow, that is extraordinarily boring looking. So I'm like, okay, I don't think that's going to work. And I'm not one to put big bows on things. So, as a way to sort of jazz up the boring hoop. So I decided to make it into a little pillow. And this would be a pillow that I can just put, on a table, leaning against the wall, or on a bookshelf or something like that. And so I just pulled out all my reds, and so the back is a very cute print. I don't remember which fabric line, but it's from Jera over at Quilting in the Rain. And it's this very cute fleur-de-lis tiny print with these little gold dots. So that was the perfect back. And I had learned also from watching some floss tubes that people do turn these things into pillows. It's not like that was an original thought, but they use chenille trim. Now, again, I'm a little bit on the plainer side, but this chenille trim that I'm seeing, it's, it has a diameter of, I don't know, not 3/8 of an inch, like a little, maybe more than a 1/4 inch, but not a 1/2 inch. So it's small. And so everybody seems to buy it from this one lady online on Etsy called Lady.Creates. And so I got the darkest red that she had. I was still worried it was a little bit bright, but you got to do what you got to do. So I just, I sewed this into a pillow. I put some interfacing on the back of the cross stitch project. And this created a whole new thing of, I need to redo my sewing room because I did find my interfacing, but I knew I had polyfill, and I know that I even have crushed walnuts for like pin cushions, but you can put them in pillows to give them just a little bit of weight. And I do not know where those are. So that was a bummer. But so a little interfacing on the back of the cross stitch, and just I measured 1.5 inches out on all 4 sides of the design. It's not perfectly square. And I figured that would give me an inch border, because when the pillows get fat, things, you don't see what's underneath so much. So that gave me a good border so you could see everything once it was going to be fat. And, just right sides together, sewed it together, hand sewed the gap. And then what you do with Chenille Trim, and I was very glad to see a tutorial by Nicole Spohr when she finished an autumn pillow. This Chenille Trim, because it's like, think of a pipe cleaner in a way that doesn't have a metal spine, but it has a thread spine or something, so it's floppy. So I'm like, how do you even sew this in? Like, how do you even catch it? Well, you sew it on by hand afterwards with a whip stitch. And that was quite fiddly. But it creates kind of a cool look because you've got thread, kind of going over the top. So I did find a red thread that matched pretty well. And then if you just kind of fluff it up, you can't see that that's how it was sewn on, but it looks quite nice. So anyways, I was pleased as punch with how this came out, because I spent so long like, what am I going to do with this? I don't know what to do with this. So that's my first little Christmas finish, and I love it. And the Fat Quarter Shop gave me some very nice love about it too, and reposted it on the Fat Quarter Shop cross stitch channel. Reposted it on their channel, and that was fun to see. The other thing I'm working on is still the Flea Market Flowers pattern by Lori Holt. It's a big stitch, and again, not sure what I'm going to do with that one when we're done. But it meets my criteria of not being overly cutesy. It's more a Scandinavian style. And I would maybe frame that and put it in a sewing room. But you do have to be careful, because framing these things are expensive. But, I'll send a quilt out for long arm quilting, and that's expensive. But yeah, I don't know. I'm coming to terms with the cost of all this. So I am enjoying that. I worked on it this morning and then realized that I was off a square. I'm going to have to do some ripping out. So that will be my afternoon activity. The other pattern that has recently come out, and if you are in the cross-stitch world at all, as it relates to Fat Quarter Shop especially, you will know that everybody is stitching this pattern called Autumn Love. And it's also by Lori Holt. Kimberly over at Fat Quarter Shop definitely loves Lori Holt designs, as do I. Even though they tend a little on the cutesy side, they're also kind of on the quilty side, which I do like. So this is a large project. If you did it on just 14 count Aida, it's basically 13.5 by 15.5 inches. So I love it. I mean, it's very cute. I'm not probably going to stitch it like this. I also do not like, it's got some cutesy letters where it says autumn. Like, nah, that's not really me. So what I think I'm going to do, so it's a center motif of a house. And then there's lots of small motifs, mostly square, some rectangular around the sides. Some are quilt blocks. There's this very cute one that's like a pumpkin. Actually, it's a lot of quilt blocks, a lot of Lori Holt style quilt blocks. And I counted them. They are 35 stitches by 35 stitches. And what I have come across, and I think I'm going to try, is stitching them as individual little things, and they called smalls, just a little small thing, and doing little pillow finishes, making them tiny little pillows. And you can get like a bowl. There's some very cute like kind of wooden bowls at like TJ Maxx, and you can just throw them all in there, and it's just, for me, I'm about the process of it. They're fun to make, and then you can just display them. And so that is a way for me to do a little bit of seasonal stitching. These are all, with the color-wise, they're very, autumn inspired. But you can also do the same thing at Christmas. And it's also the perfect thing to do, I think, with the Lori Holt stitch cards, which I got another one of those, and those are super cute. They have them packaged up like they're little postcards, but these are 34 inch. They're not inch, 34 stitch squares. And I'm currently working on one that I lost track on because I started doing the flea market flowers, but that, has a teapot and a teacup and strawberries. The ones that came out this month, set N, it's like a gnome and a mushroom and a flower and a snail. I will never do the snail, but I probably do the other three. And yeah, it's like one of those things where you can just like probably sit down in an evening or two and knock one of these out. And and I've like, they're super cute, but what am I going to do with them? I'll just make them into these tiny little pillows that, people can play with that'll be on a shelf. So that is part of how I'm reconciling the time I'm spending stitching of how to finish things. And the last thing that they sent, last episode I talked about the Typeface series, which it's a Christmas series. It has half of a face. That one was Santa, half his face, and then on the other side, different names for Santa in different styles of type. Well, now the Frosty one came out. So it's half of a snowman, and then it says Frosty the Snowman, Jack Frost, Jolly Happy Soul. So it's very cute. I will probably give away these. There's a Rudolph one too that I don't have. But as we get closer to Christmas, I think I'm going to give those away because they are super cute. But I don't think that I will ever get around to stitching those, so I would like to share those. So that will be a future giveaway. Okay, I actually do want to talk a little bit about some knitting, because I would like to get back to my elementary shawl. You may remember the summer of 2021, my friend Frances and I started knitting this, the elementary shawl. It is a free pattern from Pearl Soho. And man, I had a hard time deciding on the color, but I'm using this beautiful linen yarn from them as well. And mine is like a kind of a dusty pink. And it's a very easy knit. It is just straight. It's stockinette, so it's all knitting on one side and purling back, and it's like over 100 stitches each way. I really got so much better at my purl stitch because you have to do it so often. At first, I was like, I don't know if I could stand purling that much, but it really helped. Also, I made several mistakes early on that I had to rip back and fix, and now I'm going to knock on wood here that I feel like I became a better knitter just by the sheer volume of knitting, and I just stopped making mistakes where I would drop stitches or, just like the little types of technical mistakes that you can make. And so I'd like to get back to that. I, again, will probably not finish it this year. I think it's about half done. I should have started it back in the summer, except for the fact that it's getting big and that makes you hot when you knit. So I know a number of you also cast on the elementary shawl, and I'm curious if anybody finished it. Frances and I have not finished ours, but I want to get back to knitting that. And I also, when I kind of got into knitting, rediscovered knitting as I do every so often, I started knitting these chemo hats for Knots of Love for charity, and I have finished 2 and I'm almost done with the third one. My daughter has crocheted one, and I've decided that I would like to finish up that one, and the next time I see my daughter, tell her bring that one and I will mail those in. I would just be nice to get those mailed over to the charity before Christmas. And again, that's called Knots of Love. And it's a great program. I'll put a link in the show notes, but they have all these free patterns. So it's a great way to, for me, I love to knit, but I live in Southern California and we just don't need that many knitted things. And so this is a way to scratch that itch and do some good at the same time. And now that I am thinking about kind of rotating through my various crafts during the week, I'm excited to be able to get back to that. Wow, I thought this was going to be a short episode because I didn't do that much, but apparently I can talk a lot about nothing. So let's get on to books. I am almost done, so I do feel I can unreservedly recommend it. I'm almost done with State of Wonder by Ann Patchett. I've been on a little bit of an Ann Patchett tear, and I think that's going to continue, to be honest with you. State of Wonder. Well, first of all, let me just tell you a little story about this that maybe you've heard before. In the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, she talks a lot about creativity and inspiration and things like that. So she's a writer. I'm sure you know she wrote Eat, Pray, Love. So she was saying, is her feeling that inspiration kind of visits you, gives you ideas, and if you do not take inspiration up on it, it will move that idea to somebody else. So she had this book for years. She had this idea for a book that was set in the Amazon. And I don't remember exactly what else it was, but it was a book set in the Amazon. And she kept thinking, oh, that would be a great idea. And like, I don't know, some number of years, like 10 years goes by and she has not written this book. And then she's having dinner with Ann Patchett. And Ann Patchett says, let me tell you the story. Let me tell you about the book I'm working on. It's set in the Amazon, and she goes on to tell her, and they are not exactly the same book or anything, but there are definitely similarities. And Elizabeth Gilbert just felt like, okay, like I did not take inspiration sort of being a being here, up on this idea, and it was moved on to Ann Patchett, who has then executed it beautifully. And I love that idea. So State of Wonder is a story about a woman who is a doctor and a researcher, and she goes to the Amazon to find out what happened to a coworker who went down there to check on the progress of some drug research that was happening down there, some fertility drug research. And then they get the letter that he's dead, and it's in the middle of the jungle, and the details are sketchy. So she is asked to go get more, not only find out what happened to him, and then really find out what's happening with this drug, because the communication has not been good. And so she very reluctantly does this, and then she gets down there, and of course, just like everything is going wrong. She doesn't speak the language. They lose her luggage and everything. And I don't want to give too much away, but it's like I always say that Ann Patchett writes quiet books. They're not particularly plot driven. Her writing, is so beautiful. it takes my breath away sometimes. But this book, it builds. It's got some twists and turns. Like just when you kind of think it's going to pan out, then something else happens. I still actually have. I'm actually doing it as an audiobook, and I can highly recommend it. It's a great reader, and I have like 30 minutes left. So I have absolutely loved it. So I'm going to be looking for another Ann Patchett book, which also makes me feel better about myself because she is a good, serious writer. So it is the antidote to my cross-stitching mysteries, which is what I've been reading lately. So that is, before I talk about that, one of you wonderful readers, and I never remember to bring this up before I sit down, mentioned that Ann Patchett wrote, apparently during lockdown, a book of essays called These Precious Days. And I looked it up on Amazon. It's got an amazing review. So I'm definitely going to be reading that. But I think I'm just going to make a checklist and work my way through all the Ann Patchett books. So I've already read The Dutch House and Commonwealth, Bel Canto, and now State of Wonder. So excited about just kind of diving into, doing a deep dive into an author. So last time, the last few episodes, I've talked about how I have fallen into these the Stitches and Crime series, which always has the corny cross-stitching titles. I don't love a lot of these cozy mysteries. Really go heavy on the punny plays on words, and I find it a little cringy, to be honest with you. But I just finished, so I bought them on Kindle. Like there was books 1 through 3 is one series, books 4 through 6. I this morning just finished the 6th book in that series. So they're little mysteries. I won't go into them because I've talked about them in the last 2 episodes, but they're just they're fun little mysteries about a woman who runs this is kind of interesting, a salvaging operation where she goes in and salvages historic buildings and resells that stuff. It has like virtually nothing to do with cross-stitching except for that's how she unwinds at the end of the night. So don't be afraid of that. But you can get the series of 3 books for $8.99, so $3 a book as a Kindle book. So I'll probably get the next 3 because they, for me, are the perfect book to read right before I'm falling asleep at night. Now, I am waiting for my next audiobook is called The Thursday Murder Club, and this was highly recommended to me by a friend of mine. Who is not into the cozy mystery thing. So it may have been her first foray into this, but she read it for her book club. And so that should pop over to me this week, and I'm excited about that. And so I'll tell you more, but it just sounded so cute. The Thursday Murder Club. It's about a group of women who are like in a retirement village, and they meet over at the jigsaw table, and they talk about unsolved murders. So that's kind of their thing, which reminds me a little bit of Only Murders in the Building, where, all the people are super into these true crime podcasts. But I digress. So they talk about unsolved murders, and then a murder happens in their town, and then they get to apply all that they have learned. So I'll tell you more about that next time, but I thought that sounded very cute. From a TV show standpoint, my husband and I finished Better Call Saul, which was ended really well. It was a great series. And then we moved on to Stranger Things, and I don't know. I have such mixed feelings about Stranger Things. I'm really only there to relive my high school and college days from an aesthetic standpoint. And I'm just like, oh yeah, I had a shirt like that. Oh, I had earrings. Oh, I definitely did my hair like that. So that's fun. But it's honestly, it's straight up horror. So I'm not sure why I keep pushing through, because I feel like, oh, it's a cultural phenomenon. I need to finish this. We may bail out on it. I'm not. I remember being so relieved when the last season was over. So I mean, it's cute, but it's kind of not my thing. So take what you will from that. In those cute little cross-stitching novels I was telling you about, she's always talking about what show she's watching as she's cross-stitching, and it's their current books, so they're like shows that are out. And so she talked about her new favorite show was called Manifest. I'm like, is that a real show? It is. And so before I describe this to you, I have to tell you that we watched one episode with my husband. He's like, this is a you thing. This isn't a me thing. And then when we were on FaceTime with my daughter and I described the premise of the show, she's like, oh my gosh, Mom, that is such a you show. So the premise of this show is that Manifest refers to the list of passengers on an airplane. So this flight is coming back from Jamaica. There's a large family trip, parents and their kids and the grandkids. They've all gone to Jamaica, and they get split up on the flight home. So some of them go on one flight, but the other one stood, just held back to get the $400 they pay you if you took a later flight. And the people who there were three of them. A brother and sister, grown, like in their 40s or 30s, 40s, and then one of their children all stayed back and went on the later flight. And during that flight, it hits a bunch of turbulence, which, suitcases are flying, like significant turbulence, and then it settles down. And then when they land, they find out that it is 5.5 years later. So something has happened. They have not aged one bit, but everyone has moved on with their lives for 5 years. And so the reason my family says this is a thing for me is I loved Lost. There was a show called Under the Dome that I liked, the 4400, which is like 4,400 people, were abducted by aliens and then came back, and they're trying to figure it out. So it is a total me show. So it's, and so these people, now that they're back, the people that were on the airplane, they're all finding that they have these like weird, they have like visions, and they hear things, which kind of leads them to these problems they need to solve and people they need to save, and they're all trying to figure it out. Anyways, I'm enjoying it. I kind of zipped through the first season really fast. I'm just like, let it run as I'm stitching every evening. As I sit down about 8:30 every night and stitch till about 10. So that's going fast. I'm into the second season, and it's still good, but I think I'm going to set that one aside because years ago, my daughter recommended the show Dairy Girls, which she said that's such a mom show. You would love that. And I know that the last season just dropped, and I'm like, why have I never watched that show? So I'll tell you more about it when I know more about it, but I believe it takes place in Ireland. And so I think I'm going to take a break from Manifest and go watch Dairy Girls, because I know my daughter's watching it. It'll be fun to kind of, if I get caught up, to talk about how the whole show ended. What else? So that's kind of all we've been watching. There is a new season. If you're on Acorn, there's a new season of My Life is Murder, which is this fun murder show that involves Lucy Lovelace, is that right? Who was Xena Warrior Princess, takes place in New Zealand. It's delightful. I've talked about it before. So there's a new season just dropped for that. So that has been really fun. And that's about it for TV show stuff. All right, let's wrap this episode up with a little bit of a talk about planning. So we're here in the fourth quarter of the year. From a business standpoint, this is a very significant quarter. I missed it, but I kind of like to figure out when 90 days from the end of the year is, because it's kind of fun to go, okay, what can I do with the last 90 days of the year, which is maybe not going to be your most productive time because of the holidays. That's very disruptive, and we should not be being super productive. We should be enjoying our family and enjoying the holidays. But this is the point. We're mid-October. I want to think about what are the things that I can do now so that I am not stressed out when the holidays come. Now, personally, the two things that I always like to get done early, and I don't always succeed, are I make a calendar, a Shutterfly calendar for my dad, where I get pictures from all my siblings, family pictures, and for years they would have family pages. There's 4 of us kids, so every family would have a page, and as kids get older, it doesn't always work out that you've got the right number of pictures. So now every page is just a whole hodgepodge, a mix, and it turns out I like that so much more instead of waiting for 4 months to see a picture of my kids. So anyways, it's a thing that on some level I dread doing, but once I sit down and do it, I always have a lot of fun. And I always think, why don't you just get this done earlier? So Shutterfly calendar, and then Christmas cards. Now last year I decided I'm not doing Christmas cards anymore. Well, this year we have pictures from Italy. So I'm thinking maybe I can pull one of those pictures from Italy and do a round of Christmas cards. And that's kind of how I kind of want to do Christmas cards, just kind of do them when I feel like it, not when it's feels like an obligation. So those are the two things that I want to get working on. The other thing is that this is a great time to start thinking about what you're going to be cooking and like baking for the holiday. So we just did a Costco run, and I haven't gotten into this on the podcast so much, but I will. As I continue, we will. And that is like, I'm not a full prepper, but I'm definitely keeping a deeper extended pantry, even though there's only 2 of us now, because now I've realized that sometimes things happen, whether it's a pandemic or a wildfire or power goes out or a, Hurricane Ian or whatever, where you might not be able to get to the store. And I want to make sure that I've got a very deep pantry. I also don't love grocery shopping, so I would like to do it more intensely, less often. So at this point, like we just did a Costco run the other day, and I got 8 pounds of butter. They come in little four packages at a time. I got 2, which is a lot for us, but I also know that we run through a lot of butter at Thanksgiving. We run through a lot of butter at Christmas. It doesn't go bad. I mean, I don't even need to freeze. I don't have so much that I need to freeze. But like, that's one thing I don't need to worry about. Like at this point, I could go buy they probably have the stuffing out. So you can start thinking about things like that. It's also this time of year. I like to stock up on making sure I've got the baking supplies. Do I have, 2 bags of flour and maybe, 2 bags of sugar, just to have that. So you're not running out. This is the time of year where the only time of the year that I use shortening. And so I need to make sure I have that. And this is also the time of year that I throw out my baking powder and buy a new one. Because one time in my life, I had the experience that something didn't rise because the baking powder was old. And I don't use it. I can't use it up. I don't use it enough, but it's, $1.25 or something. So I always make sure this time of year I grab, a new one of those. So, I'm not the type that's going to like go make sugar cookie dough and freeze it or that. I'm not thinking that far ahead. I'm just thinking about what can I do now that will make things easier later. The other thing that I don't do that I wish I could get into is getting all the Christmas shopping knocked out early. But I think my family always has a little bit of a hard time thinking ahead. It's like, you get into the role of thinking about what do I want. And so if they come up with some things early, by the time we really get close to Christmas, then they've really figured out what they wanted and what I bought isn't right. So I kind of like to wait. Plus, I do like to shop when I'm in the season a little bit, because that does feel festive. But getting a few things out of the way would not be bad. The Fly Lady had this thing, she has this, preparing for Christmas, whatever, challenge or whatever from many, many years ago. And she had this idea of pretend that you were going on a cruise on December 1st and you get back on Christmas Eve. So you have to have everything done ahead of time. I always thought that was kind of an interesting idea, but I'm not really there yet. Also, if you do Christmas crafting, I know I'm not this person. I do not usually make things as gifts because I get stressed out and then the joy goes out of it. But if you are, this is the time to really maybe start figuring that out and start getting going so that you're not, still making a quilt on December 23rd. So I just want to kind of throw that out there to you. So let's all start thinking ahead in a way that we can have a more relaxed Christmas or holiday season in general, however you celebrate that. I got some wonderful reviews, and I want to thank you so much for those. So Blue Bisco and A Perry 61, thank you so much for your wonderful reviews. I really appreciate it. And if you feel so inclined, pop over there to wherever you listen, but I think mostly Apple Podcasts, and rate and review the podcast. It really helps other people find it. You can find me online at my blog, Simple Handmade Everyday, on Instagram as Kristen Esser, and please consider joining the Simple Handmade Everyday Facebook group so that we can keep the conversation going. You guys have a wonderful week.